Welcome to today's episode of The Heart of the Matter, a program where we deal with real people, with real life and with real issues. Today we're talking about street hawking on the streets of Nigeria. But actually, by the time we finish this episode, you're going to realize that the issues are a lot deeper than just seeing people selling goods out on the streets. We'll talk about child violence, violence against females, and many other things that we see sadly on our streets in Lagos and all over Nigeria today. We're very, very blessed to have with us today Genevieve Ikenechukwu. You happen to be the editor of Minds magazine, which Minds stands for Managing Intolerable Neglect and Domestic Situations. Yes. Welcome.
Thank you.
Tell us about Minds and tell us what's inspired you to put this magazine together.
Minds is an initiative of my charity, or my foundation called the Obi Ikenechukwu Foundation. Okay. The Obi Ikenechukwu Foundation is a charity that looks into the welfare of orphan kids and victims of violence. And when we talk about victims of violence, our focus really is on female victims of violence. Again, when we talk about violence, we split it into two categories. So we're looking at general violence to females, especially underage abused girls, and domestic violence to females as well. So again, with particular reference to underage abused girls. So the whole essence of Minds, as I said, is one of our initiatives within the foundation, is really to draw more attention and awareness to the plight of the orphan child and the life that an orphan child lives on a daily basis. Try to get into the mind of the orphan child and get into the mind of a survivor of violence, of especially domestic violence, or indeed general violence. We're going to go into that a bit today, and we'll look into a particular case study of general violence.
But you talk about getting into the mind of the orphan child, the mind of that abused child. Take us a bit deeper. How do you mean getting into the mind? What are you looking for in that mind?
You're looking for the core. You're looking for what makes the child what he or she is at that point in time. You're looking for why is this particular child so sensitive? Why does he or she react in a certain way when Abiola, who is from a normal, stable environment with mommy and daddy, they are not reacting that way to a particular issue? So I think, in my opinion, the orphan child is hyper sensitive and clearly do not see things the way everybody else would see things. So they are to be dealt with almost as though you're dealing with
something precious,
a baby, almost. So I am particularly concerned for generally orphans and the way they're dealt with in the society, because I think we do not take that time to connect with them and understand them, and that's the whole essence of Minds and the whole essence of the Obi Ikenechukwu Foundation being there. So it goes beyond just providing them the physical things that they need, but it's giving them that time and the attention that mommy and daddy would have given them if they were here, but clearly mommy and daddy are not here, so they can't, or even mom or dad, not one parent is around to give them such attention.
Sure. But let me take this a little bit deeper as well, because it sounds to me like you're probably talking about very young orphans. I was thinking to myself, all right, if I met somebody, say, your age or my age, who are orphaned, they're not going to have it on their forehead, so I won't quite know whether I should treat them differentially or not, and they might not want to be treated differentially or not. So should our focus just be on the younger ones, or is it anybody who's been orphaned that we should be concerned about?
I tell you why my focus is at this stage on the younger ones. I speak from the perspective of an adult orphan now. So speaking to me as an orphan child, so when I was there, I've been through it, so I know that at the time the way I reasoned, and now, in fact, honestly speaking, I think if you ask most adult orphans now who were orphaned as kids, they'll probably tell you that deep inside of them there's still that yearning, and it does not matter how old you are. There's always that yearning for a certain kind of attention that you lacked all your life. So I am very, very concerned about the way our society deals with an orphan child.
I want us to talk about some of the practical things that can be done to deal with this, and then I think we should look at some real-life examples. I mean, we're talking about street hawking How did kids get there? Some of these kids are orphans, but
some of them are orphans from orphanages, apparently.
there you go. So before we even go there, I mean, you even gave examples of people caring in the orphanages themselves, not actually probably knowing what to do. So what do we do differently? What exactly do you want Nigerians to do? Be they working in orphanages, be they people like me, for example, who might be able to help. What do we do and how do we go about it?
I think we need to just take out a bit more time from our very busy schedule and go to places where these children are. In my own case, I've come all the way from London, living my very comfortable life and career, just to spend time in Nigeria and give back to my people. And I think we can all do that, or maybe not leave a very good job and your home and come down to a place like this. But even from there, wherever it is you might find yourself, it goes beyond giving money, I can tell you that now. It's deeper than that. It's getting to know what it means to be an orphan, spending more time with an orphan child, talking to them like mommy or daddy would probably have done, asking them what they would like to become. Those are the simple things that people don't do with these kids. Nobody asks them, what would you like to be tomorrow? And hopefully, you try and help that child fulfill that dream as best you can. And maybe if we're able to even see the child as though he or she were yours, maybe that will make it a bit easier, to sit with such kids. It saddens me to think that a lot of orphans who have not been rescued from the street are potentially our surgeons, our lawyers, our nurses, our technicians, and would end up being touts, would end up being...
Because they didn't have the opportunity.
Because they didn't have the opportunity, because there was no one to help them out of, of that life.
Okay. But you see, before talking about orphans, you also talked about victims of violence, which is one of the things that MIND focuses on. And you distinguish between what you called, I think, general violence and then domestic violence. Let's talk a bit more about that. Okay.
General violence, in my opinion, and simply put, is violence that happens outside, not necessarily outside your home, because actually, arguably, in law, violence could happen outside your home and is still deemed domestic violence, depending on who is the perpetrator. So it's not necessarily all violence that takes place outside your home that is general. But in this case, I think it's safe to say that any violence that occurs towards anybody, in this case a child, outside the four walls of their home, it could be on the street, it could be in class, it could be in the office, especially on the street, in the public. Armed robbery, a slap on the face by some total stranger, insult, by strangers, threats of so anything that happens that threatens your lifestyle in any way, that puts fear in you and happens outside your home by other people. It could be strangers, it could be people you even know, it could be your neighbor. Then that will be general violence.
And of course, I mean, this is your first edition of Minds. Focuses on violence. And from what I know, is dedicated to the memory of young Sarah Ibukunle, who died last year. Killed in the crossfire of an armed robbery incident in Lekki Phase 1 estate in Lagos State.
That's right.
Talk about that.
I'll tell you a bit more about Sarah. Actually, when I speak about Sarah, I get a bit passionate about it, because it tells you, it basically draws you to the belly of violence itself, the extent to which this can ruin a family and probably the only hope they had in their family. Now, Sarah Ibukunle was a young girl, a 13-year-old girl, who unfortunately met her death, whilst hawking on the streets of Lagos. Sarah was the last of 5 children. 2 of them had died. I didn't meet those ones. Apparently, they had lost 2 kids. I don't know anything about those ones. Then there were 3 left. Sarah's 2 older sisters, and then Sarah. And Sarah used to live with her great-great-grandmother. No, her great-grandmother in their village somewhere in understate because the mother just could not afford to keep all of them and take care of all of them. Once her great-grandmother died, that's the mother's grandmother, the mother went to get Sarah from their village in understate and brought her to live with them in Lagos. Sarah always wanted to be educated. Yeah. Her great-grandmother could not afford to send her to school. So Sarah lived with her great-grandmother until 2010, I think, when she passed. And then her mother brought her. Unfortunately, bringing her to Lagos didn't make that much of a difference because the mother could not even afford to send Sarah to school. And Sarah always wanted to go to school. Now, when Sarah came to live with her mother, the only other option the mother had to be able to send Sarah to school, because she always said she wanted to go to school. She always wanted to become a lawyer, she said every single day. The only other option she had was to assist her mother with her trade. Her mother sold smoked fish. Yes. Okay? And so that was what Sarah did. Every time, every day, Sarah would hawk her mother's fish. And then she started to attend a public school, which was good to an extent because it was free. But because she always wanted to become a lawyer, her mother said to her, to become a lawyer, we need to save some money, and we don't have that. So you work, you hawk fish, and then we put that aside. And then they eat from that as well. So she was basically the breadwinner at such a tender age. I'll tell you one thing about Sarah as well. Sarah, I said she was 13, but she was only in primary 2, going on to primary 3. Okay? Obviously, when her mates were in secondary school, that was because they were poor. They just could not afford to educate Sarah. But she loved every single minute she was in class. I had gone to the school, I'd interviewed her classmates, her teacher, and her head teacher, and everyone had the same story about Sarah.
But I'll tell you this, I mean, that is such a tragic story. I mean, we've had pictures of Sarah rolling in the background. There are some all over social media that showed her deceased corpse, you know, after this tragic event, which we are not going to show because we just think it's too sensitive.
It is.
But, you know, out of that young life, you know, life of a street hawker with the ambition of education, maybe one good thing that has come out of it is that it's now brought to the fore this issue about, you know, kids in this situation. We're going to take a break now, and we'll come back and talk about this some more. Viewers, we hope that this has been quite interesting for you so far. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Heart of the Matter, where we're talking about real people, real life, and real issues. And today's episode is focusing on street hawking, but much broader than that. There are things that have led to street hawking in many cases. We're talking about, you know, the plight of orphans, especially in Nigeria. We're talking about violence, you know, general violence, domestic violence, especially as it affects young girls. And just before we went on the break, we were talking with our guest, Genevieve Ikenechukwu, about the tragic end of the young lady who died last year, Ibukunle. And you were telling us about her dreams, her ambitions to study, but she met her untimely end selling smoked fish. And she was out there because the family had no money to train her. So street hawking, many people think is a nuisance. People are, you know, they're in the traffic and things, but this is a case where somebody, you would argue out of poverty, was forced in the streets. So where do you think the bias is? I mean, keep this going or stop street hawking?
Oh, you know what? I mean, it's going to be very easy for me to say stop it. But again, if I say stop it, then we have the parents who would say to me, what do you mean stop it? So how do we live? How do we survive? Maybe we should just define street hawking, just for the benefit of the public, so they understand where we're going to. Street hawking or child street hawking is really the involvement of a child in the activities or responsibilities of an adult, if that makes any sense. So you're getting a child or children to be involved in responsibilities that really should not be theirs. Even arguably with adults, you can actually argue that street hawking is a moral issue. It's not even right.
Well, it's illegal for a start.
It's illegal.
At least in Lagos State and many other states in the country.
It's illegal.
Yes.
So morally and otherwise, it's not. It shouldn't be allowed. So, but generally speaking, when you involve a child in activities that really should be confined either, to the background somewhere or to adults, then that becomes an abuse to their rights. It's an abuse, to their human rights, their civil rights. It's an abuse psychologically to them. Okay, you're taking away their childhood. You're taking away everything they need to enjoy as a child. So instead of a child going out and playing with every other kid and studying when they should study and taking their siesta, they're hawking on the street. So, so asking me whether this should stop or not is not a question that I even want to think about or try to rationalize. It should stop.
So the issue then is, how do we deal with what comes about that? Because, even as you were talking, I was thinking of, the other case particularly in the international fashion industry.
Yes.
There's a campaign that says stop child labor, in India or wherever. Yeah. And frankly speaking, this is the same issue that we have of kids underage hawking in the streets of Lagos. And in the case of poor, Sarah Ibukunle, she caught a stray bullet or bullets. Yeah. And that took her young life away. Yeah. Now, this needs to be stopped. It's illegal. As you said, it's child abuse. How do we stop it? What are the alternatives? Because that plight of that mother or that father says, I'm poor, I don't have money. Yes. It's still real. So what is the answer?
It's very real, which is sad as well. And this is why I think the government comes in. Okay. I keep falling back on the government. Maybe from a lawyer's perspective, I've worked with the government in the UK for 15 years. So I know that these are issues that the government would, address. And when you have individuals or organizations or charities assisting, then, appreciate what they're doing, because really what they're doing is taking a bit of your responsibility onto themselves, trying to alleviate the menace in the society. I think that when you look at some of the reasons why people do things like this, then you probably understand how to put a stop to it. A major reason, like in the case of the Ibukunles, would be poverty. And I think, having known the family since 2015, apart from poverty, ignorance. Okay, and when you talk about ignorance, in other words, you're talking about the lack of education and understanding of the implication of their action. Sarah's mother, until the death of Sarah, would not understand the likes of you and I telling her, stop this. Stop what? What are you saying to me? That's the only way I get to eat every day. That's the only way I get to feed my family. I've got 3 young girls. No husband to help me out. I'm not educated. She barely speaks English. She doesn't speak English, not barely. She doesn't even speak English. So I have an interpreter, to interpret for both of us every time I go to see them. Yeah. So it's easy to stand back and say, stop. But I also appreciate the reasons why things like this are done by the parents. Sure. Now, what do you and I do to help? What does the government do to help? We're talking about poverty. There are provisions within the Child Rights Act and the Child Rights Law of Lagos State that talks about assisting parents who earn below the minimum wage. Sarah's family does not even earn the minimum wage. So where is the government in all this? When this happened to Sarah, I wasn't even in Nigeria, and I said that to everyone who cares to listen. This is the implication of this menace called street hawking and violence towards our children on our own streets. I was in London when it happened, and I saw it online when and then when I got into the country about a few days later, everyone was talking about it. So the government knew about it. It was a national thing. Everyone talked about it. But what surprised me the most was the fact that a few days, weeks, maybe a couple of months later, everyone has forgotten about them. No one is talking about them anymore. Oh, it's the usual thing. It comes and goes, Jen. So I've been told by a few people.
So let's come to what the government should do specifically. You talked about provisions in the Child Rights Act. Yeah. But there's a harsh reality too. There's no money in this country, certainly at the moment. Now, I'm just probably espousing all the cliche statements.
I was just going to say,
So
we hear that all, it's so cliche, it's irritating. Okay, when we started, we talked about the importance of money.
Yes.
But money is not everything, okay? It's not just about money. You're talking about ignorance. We're talking about the lack of education. Why would the government think about money when we know we can actually have a seminar within the hall given to us for free and invite these illiterate women and talk to them regularly about the implication of some of their actions, like street hawking, the dangers of sending your kids out to the street to hawk.
Yes.
There are several dangers that the children are exposed to. There are ritualists on the street. There are reckless drivers on the street. There are rapists on the street. Mothers would not listen to that and go back home and say, don't worry, it doesn't matter, let them rape my child, she can still go tomorrow. I don't think any sane mother would listen to that and not consider...
But do you genuinely believe that these mothers who send their children out to the street don't know that their kids could get run over?
This is what we talk about.
Yes.
This is where we come when we talk about poverty. And we talk, the ones who don't know, we refer to them as the ignorant ones.
Yes.
The ones who know, who would say to you, if my child does not go out to hawk, or I don't go out to hawk, how do I survive? What can you do to help me so that I do not have to send Sarah out to hawk?
Okay, can I get controversial?
You're allowed to.
I'm going to use an example in China because I'm actually saying, should there be birth control? Now, as a Christian, there are different points of views here, and people say, how dare you talk about that? But I'm just saying the Chinese. One said you could have only one child per family. I'm not saying go and kill babies or prevent. I'm just saying be intelligent towards it.
Yeah.
So if people are having 5, 10 children, which some of these cases they do have, and they're already in a very poor situation, yes, I'm trying to understand why they do that, knowing full well that they will struggle to look after those kids.
Again, you have to get into their minds because they don't reason like you and I.
So help us understand that.
That is why, unfortunately, I'm not one of those mothers who will probably have more than 1 or 2 kids. So I can't understand why. But when you're dealing with an illiterate, it's going to take a lot more than just telling them every day, don't have one child. Don't tell them. It takes a lot more. They need to really understand why they cannot. Sure. Their spouse needs to understand why he needs to be responsible.
Sure.
You know, in terms of sitting down and let's get educated about this thing called child or birth control. They have no clue what we're talking about.
So what is the process? Because, and you're spot on there actually, Genevieve. And I don't think we consider it to be a simple thing. Okay.
I think it's going to take a lot more than just, like I said, just telling them to stop it, don't have more kids, don't have more kids. They need to be able to understand why they shouldn't.
Yes.
Because I'm sure in the, well, maybe not sure, in the first instance, I don't think that, some people believe in this country that when you're, or not just in this country, most African cultures, that when you're married, you're just there basically to make kids, you know, and it's part of our culture to an extent in some parts of Africa.
That's right. Yes.
And if you're going to be telling a woman who's been brought up to believe that this is what you're on this earth to do, and you're trying to change that mindset, it goes beyond what the Chinese government is doing.
No, absolutely. It can be very, very difficult, and I share that. So, you know, where I was trying to go with this, Genevieve, is to say, okay, you mentioned government.
Yes.
I'd heard you talk about charities before. You even gave examples of the United Kingdom. Oxfam, which is very global, but very prevalent in the UK. They do a lot of this work, you know, and there are many others like that.
Yes.
But I meant saying, how do we bring that into Nigeria? How do we tackle this culture that you talk about, which is very, very real, you know? Somebody who just believes that I'm a baby-making machine. Now, maybe through government, there's a national, you know, orientation agency. Maybe churches should get involved. Maybe individuals should get involved. You know, being able to speak into people's lives and say, look, here are the consequences of what you're doing. Because I really fear that if we don't tackle this issue, the problem won't go away. And street hawking, for example, is one side of a genuine problem of poverty, of ignorance, of lack of education, of lack of opportunities. Why should a child like Sarah Ibukunle, end her short life? And then we're in an environment where arguably the economic situation, the social situation is such that people don't have much of an alternative. How do these people make a living if not in the streets? I'm not supporting it, but I'm just throwing that out there. I mean, what's your view on that?
I would say that the government, again, I come back to the government because I can't think of any other effective way of addressing this problem beyond having the government being the main,
driver.
Driver of this whole thing, and then others follow. Really, education is very important. It is key. Okay, provision of free education to our children. And when I say free education, I'm sure they do in some parts, and I'm sure that Lagos State probably has, some public schools like where Sarah attended. I've been there. It's not a conducive environment for any child to study. The government needs to do a lot more. Yesterday I was on Facebook, and there was the photo of this little girl on a boat in the Makoko area of Lagos State, reading and I think doing her homework or something on the boat.
Yes.
Okay, so I think that the government is trying, but they could do better. I think that it should look into not just educating the parents, but the children, the primary school kids. Primary schools should be a more conducive environment for children to be in from morning to sometime in the early hours of the afternoon. It should become the parents' responsibility from that point to pick up their kids, take them back home. So instead of people like Sarah getting home and taking off their uniforms and putting on their selling clothes and go home, they stay back home, rest, or remain in school for some extra school activities or studies or something, and get back home as normal in the evening. I think the government needs to, I don't know if this free education thing still works effectively here, but I think they do in some parts of Nigeria. Lagos State might be one of those states. It might not be good enough, but I think that they can continue with such. I think that the parents, the government at some point as well should have a forum where the parents of the children themselves would, and I know that they might be illiterate, but I think by the time they hear this over and over again on a regular basis, it would register.
Okay.
It would register. It would resonate with every parent.
Genevieve Ikenechukwu, I have to thank you so much for your time today and all of your insights. Unfortunately, all good things, all great conversations have an end, and we've run out of time today. But viewers, we really hope that you've been touched by all that you've heard discussed today, starting with the plight of street hawkers. But we've learned that it's actually much deeper than that. We've seen violence from different perspectives, general, domestic, and then actually even getting to the level of understanding that this is more than just physical violence. We've got financial violence and psychological violence and all sorts of other areas, sexual violence. But one of the biggest tragedies is what can happen and does happen to many of these young children, most of them not of working age, who are out there on the streets every day trying to fend for themselves and fend for families that are struggling. And one such story was that of the late Sarah Ibukunle, who at the age of 13 met her untimely end of the streets of Lekki in Lagos, where she unfortunately caught some stray bullets in the crossfire from an ongoing armed robbery at the time. This is a real tragic situation for many other families. And, let Sarah's memory not just go by. There needs to be a solution to this issue of street hawking. It's against the law, but I often ask myself, and even if you apply the law, what's the alternative for a lot of these people? There needs to be greater opportunities to bring people out of poverty so they don't have to be on the streets. And so look, stay blessed, and anything you can do, whether they're orphan kids or kids of violence in homes, if you can spend some time with them, and it's a bit more than just giving the gift of money, that's needed too. But spend some time, we all need to do it, showing love, showing care, showing intimacy, and connecting with them in a real deep and emotional way. Well look, until next time, stay blessed.